Hello everybody, my name is Liu Yi. I'm from Jiangxi University of Finance and Economics. Welcome to my class of International Macroeconomics. In this section, we shall discuss further about how pegs break. We will talk about the contingent monetary policies. In this section, we will explore another cause of pegs break. Is the contingent monetary policies. In countries with completely perfect economic policies, foreign currency speculators go for the attack and pegs breaks. Therefore, economists developed alternative models of crisis. Led by Maurice Obstfeld, these types of models show us the way when policy making is irrational, but pegs still break for no extra reason. This model is based on policymakers are not committed to the peg under all circumstances. Therefore, it also called a contingent commitment. To be specific, if things get bad enough, the government will let the exchange rate float rather than put the country under serious economic pain. It seems to be a reasonable consideration, but every investor in the foreign exchange market knows it and will adjust expectations at the same time. In 1992, the German central bank raised the interest rate to deal with the 1989 domestic shock. Unexpectedly, this left Britain with a higher interest rate and a lower output level. What would Britain do in response? If German and British interest rates are fairly low, then output costs in Britain are low, and nobody thinks about Britain will leave the peg. The peg is credible. However, if German interest rate rise, output in Britain falls to an extremely low level, and no one believes Britain to stay on the peg for long. Thus, to boost output and to depreciate the pound, everyone thinks Britain will flow and make expansionary monetary policy. The peg is not credible, and the market expects a depreciation in the future. But for Britain, an expected depreciation will lead to a currency premium. Investors will demand even higher interest rates in Britain to compensate for impending depreciation. This would even lower output of Britain instead of boosting it. But if German interest rates rise, output in Britain falls to an intolerable low level, and nobody expects Britain to stay on the peg for long. Instead, everyone thinks Britain will flow and use expansionary monetary policy to boost output and depreciate the pound. The peg is not credible, and the market now expects a depreciation in the future. The problem for Britain is that an expected depreciation will introduce a currency premium. Investors will demand even higher interest rates in Britain to compensate for the imminent depreciation, and this will mean even lower output and even higher pain for Britain. The economic model we have developed is in fact a self-fulfilling prophecy. Hence, in this model, we may not always find a single unique equilibrium, but rather multiple equilibrium. As we learned before, the cost of maintaining the peg is fall of output Y in the short run. But prices will be sticky and treated as given. In addition, there are some benefits from pegs, such as gains from increased trade. But when costs exceed benefits, the government will choose to flow and take expansionary monetary policy to maintain full employment output. Figure 9-16 describes how the ISLM fixed equilibrium change as demand shocks occur and the credibility of peg weakens. Panel A shows a situation when cost is small. Initially, IS1 and LM1 curve intersect at point 1, and the home interest rate equals to the foreign one to maintain the peg. In the FX diagram, the domestic return is DR1 and the foreign return is FR1. They intersect at point 1 and the exchange rate is fixed. Home output is at Y1, but the desired full employment output is slightly higher than Y1. In this situation, when the peg is credible, the economy suffers a small cost given by C1, the output gap, while panel B shows a situation when the adverse shock to output is larger. The IS2 and LM2 curve now intersect at point 2. The S curve has moved left because we assume there is an adverse shock. The LM curve has moved in to maintain the peg and preserve interest parity, so the home interest rate remains at I1. In the FX diagram, the domestic return is still DR1, and the foreign return is still FR1, and they intersect at point 2 prime, the same as point 1 prime. Home output is now much lower at Y2. Here, the economy suffers an even larger cost given by C2, the output gap. According to the above two situations, we can obtain our first important result. If the market believes that the peg is credible, the output gap increases as the size of the adverse shock increases. The third situation is the most complex one. Panel C implies government's response next year will be anticipated by investors. If the country wants to achieve full employment output next period, it must move to point 4. To be specific, it requires the LM curve shift out and allows the foreign exchange market to settle at point 4 prime. Thus, the exchange rate will depreciate to E float. The peg are maintained still, but it would no longer be credible if such a policy change were anticipated. Further, if the investors know that output is low enough to promote a depreciation, they will expect a depreciation over the coming year. This expected depreciation will appear as a currency premium in current period in the foreign exchange market of panel C. The current period's foreign return curve will be shifted up by an amount equal to the currency premium, as far as FR2. If the central bank wants to maintain the peg, despite it isn't credible, it has to ensure foreign exchange market equilibrium at point 3 prime. So it must raise the home interest rate to I3. Graphically, this means the domestic return curve must also shift up by an amount equal to the currency premium. As far as the R2, this shift will lower home demand and lead to even lower output today, such as Y3. In more details, today the IS curve moves out slightly to IS3 due to expected depreciation, but the LM curve moved to LM3 to defend the peg. The latter effect dominates because we know demand and output have to be reduced today under higher interest rate. So the new IS-LM equilibrium is at point 3, lies at the left of point 2. We can see the cost of pegging when the peg is not credible will be even higher, shown by the red line. Assuming the government believes the benefits of pegging are fixed and equal to B, equilibrium are in accordance with points on the solid segments of the red and the orange lines. The multiple equilibria we are looking for is a self-confirming equilibrium, that is, combination of investors' beliefs and government actions. In figure 9-17, the peg is always credible in zone 1 because benefits always exceed costs in this area. Thus, the government will never depreciate the currency and the investors also know it. When the peg is always non-credible in zone 3 and costs always exceeds benefit. So the government will want to depreciate and investors know it as well. Zone 2 is the gray area. It means if investors believe the peg is credible, costs of pegging are low and the peg will hold. Well, if investors believe the peg is non-credible, costs will be higher and the peg will break. Based on the above case, our conclusions are significant. If government policies are contingent, then they will depend on market sentiment. But market sentiment, in turn, depends on market beliefs to the government's action. If costs of pegging are low, then pegs will hold as long as the government desires to do so. However, if costs of pegging are high, then crisis will occur when the government obviously wants to give up. But between these extreme situations, an ambiguous area is a crisis will occur if and only if the market expects a crisis.